My interest in photography comes from the walls of my home. There were these calendar art that I found at my home, and these were the first images that I was attracted to. And then when I went to college, I saw photographs by great photographers in newspapers and magazines. So my interest in photography comes from there. But over the years, through my readings of photography and through while practicing this art, I've realized that my interest in photography really is that what images can do in our lives. How is it that we look at images, and how do these images affect us? And I think that my interest in that calendar art, which was also a place of worship in my home, and my interest in photography today, when I look at an image from the deep Amazonian forest or from a war zone or from a politician's cabin, it's the same. That how is it that these performances are being constructed, and when they are published, how is it that we react to them? And I've also come to learn that photography inherently is a lie, and what the camera records is not always the truth of the situation. And as a photographer, as a filmmaker, one has to be conscious of that. And so this kind of complexity with truth which photography brings, and the lies that it portrays, which, by the way, the medium is not portraying the lies, it's the lies that we as human beings are reading in that, is the complexity I'm deeply interested in about photography. My initial interest in the photography was how is it that an image which is created in a how is it that this image which is created in a very different part of the world from me comes to me, and it brings this kind of realism in its totality, and how is it that I'm reacting to it as if this just happened, and how it congeals that very moment when something beautiful, something magical, or something very tragic happened. So that is why I responded to photography back then, and which still is the stimulus, I believe, for me. I learned photography on my own, and I think it came as a deep interest in images and what images mean in our lives. And I was very interested in looking at them. And later on, when I had the opportunity to buy a camera and make my own images, I thought I became a photographer then. But the interest came from very early on in my life, and I still remember somehow I was given a camera to photograph a wedding that was happening in my own family, and I still remember in those days wedding photographers were very expensive, and maybe it was to cut the cost, or maybe my deep interest in photography, I was given the camera. And I still remember when the photographs came, nobody was happy, especially the bride. She didn't like the photographs at all. And then I looked at the images. What I had done is that I was kind of very much interested in, so if there was a scene, I was going just to the essence of the scene, and which in that moment meant that I cropped the entire thing and just focused on the hands or something very small. And you needed people in that kind of photography in those images, and those were missing mostly. So the people were unhappy, but I think I learned an important lesson there. I don't think that one needs to go to photography school to learn photography. I think most of the conventional education that we have today is just geared towards producing replicas of each other, and it only molds you into a certain kind of a person that you could go and fit into the system that exists. And artists are people who live outside the system. Artists are people who create new things. Artists are people who are imaginative. And most of these schools don't really allow us, don't really push us or encourage us or don't really give us that freedom to be. So I believe that you don't really need to go to a photography school to learn photography. In my ideal school for artists, I would invest and focus into nurturing these young minds and shaping them, and the focus would not be to make them into this person who can go out and be a part of the capitalistic setup. The focus would be to invest them into people so that they can understand art and understand why is that we create art. Human beings are the only species that creates art, and why do we do that? What is that deep necessity in us that propels us into doing that? And I want them to think about these things, and I want them to open. I want them to be open to these to the newer discussions about the new perspectives, not only in photography but filmmaking and art and everywhere else. So, in my ideal school, there will be no teachers. I believe in self-learning, and I would encourage my students to learn and read. I mean, it's really a sad state of the world today that we are mostly scrolling our phones and not really reading enough. So I would encourage the people in my school to read more and read lots and lot more. And there would be no prescription of books, but one could read about religion not because one has to be religious, but religion, these religious texts are quite a fine specimen of literature of their kind. So one has to read religion, and one has to read about quantum physics and evolutionary biology, and of course about art and artists. So I would encourage people to read more and to listen, to look at more images and films, and then decide that if they want to be artists or not, or if they have the urge and hunger in them to create something. Do they really want to say something? Do they have something in them to give to this world? I mean, every time I create a new work, the question that I ask myself is that what is it that I've given to this civilization? I mean, there have been so many things. Almost everything has been done in this postmodernist world. So what is it that I am contributing to this world? So this is the question that I want my students to ask themselves, and it does not come from conventional education. These are the questions that come from deep contemplation, and you have to look within. How will this contemplation come from? It comes from reading and learning, and so a very important part of the module in my ideal school would be I would encourage them to travel in the last semester of the school, so that they go and travel and experience and find how wide this world is, and there are multicultural ethnicities that exist here. And so the emphasis of this school would be to invest them in people, because I believe that art comes from a deep place of empathy, and if we are not really investing into human beings, if we are not really nurturing their sensitivity, not towards other beings and also towards this world, we are not really helping them become great artists. So I was studying here in New Delhi in college, and during that time we would go to watch films almost every weekend. And slowly we realized that most of the cinema halls, these were single screen theaters that we were going to watch films, they were shut down, and many of them were even razed down to give way to multiplexes. This truly saddened us, and we didn't know how to respond to that moment. So we decided, let's go and see that how this changing technology, this changing time is changing how people watch movies all across the country, especially in the villages. So that's when Shirley Abraham, my collaborator, and I teamed up, and we traveled all across the country, and we saw all kinds of ways of exhibition of cinema, and then we came across the traveling cinemas that were in Maharashtra. So there were these cinema companies that were traveling from one village to the other, almost covering about 300 villages in a year, to going there and screening films to a multitude of audiences who would come to this religious fair. So that's how we came across the traveling cinemas, and we found them to be belonging to a very different time scale. It felt like as if we had traveled back in time. And in that moment, when we were inside a cinema tent, surrounded by thousands of people and witnessing a huge screen in front of us, I felt as if I have really traveled back in time, back to the time when Lumiere brothers started traveling with their first cinema. And so somehow, over all these years, over 7 decades of screening films to people in the villages, these traveling cinemas have been able to preserve this primeval experience of cinema, and that is what really moved us and motivated us to begin this project of filmmaking and photography. So first, I was taking photographs, and we were also doing the research there. but the photographs that of the audiences that you mostly see from this work came much later. It came while I was making the film, and it came from a struggle that we were going through. So the struggle was that both of us were making this film, which was not really about traveling cinemas, but it evolved to become a film about the grand narrative of cinema itself. So the struggle was, how is it that we bring this deep immersion that cinema has for people? What is the mode, what is the modality of bringing that thing on screen? How do we express that deep enchantment and wonderment that people have with their cinema? And it being a very universal language, it's not about the people in an Indian village. It's the same as in France or the United States. So we really struggled with that question, and then I came up with a very simple idea, and it's not that I just thought of it. I think I started photographing the people who were sitting in the cinema tent and they were watching films, and from there the idea came that I should just make very close, intimate portraits of these people, these audiences who are deeply immersed in their cinema. And in doing that, what I did was, and which was a deep struggle for us, was that I somehow brought the monumentality of the moving image into this still image, and that was quite an achievement for myself as a photographer, because that is what we were struggling with. And in that image, if you look of an audience absorbed in their own cinema, it really it doesn't really come across as a still image. It is a gateway to the monumentality, to the iconicity of the moving image itself. Both photography and filmmaking, documentary filmmaking is very intrusive, and but I've also learned the past few years making films that it also becomes performative for the other people. So the moment you bring a camera, the reality changes. The reality that is and what it would have been is not the same. And with this idea, with this notion of performance that the people, the real people in our films bring, I think my notion of filmmaking and photography is evolving. So I choose to work with people who are okay with the presence of a camera there, and I try not to be intrusive into their lives, and I accept their performance as it comes. I learned this while making films and not while making photography. But what really happens is that, I mean, I still do photography. I make films, but I also find them intrusive. It's something that goes it's a feeling that is concurrent. And I mean, I choose to do photography and filmmaking despite being conscious of this very basic nature of these two mediums, and I think there is no way of removing this very inherent complexity in this medium.